Like I mentioned before, my name is Thomas Holt Ronzi. I'm Senior Apps Engineer. Cameron Schaffner will be joining us a little later. His actual title is he is our Manager of Customer Engineering, which is a nice, vague title. But what that means is that his job is to lead one of our advanced software engineering teams. Like Dan said, they sit in an interesting area between customer support, our level 2 and level 3 advanced support teams, and the actual our software dev team that is focused exclusively on building Q-SYS solutions. Their job is to kind of act as a go-between and focus on specific issues, um, developing diagnostic features, the tools that you use inside of Q-SYS Designer for solving problems, as well as and clearing out what we like to call tech debt, which is just the lingering stuff that maybe doesn't fit neatly into a specific product launch or a bug fix. There's always stuff in between. So Cameron's team works on that, and he heads up a group of guys who work really hard on bringing nice quality of life improvements to you guys. And perfect timing, Cameron. So Cameron's in there as well. I just saw him join, so we'll go ahead and say hi to Cameron here a little bit later when he's ready to chime in. But there he is on screen. Um, so first and foremost, we have to talk about the status block. And I know that that's roll credits. It's leveraging the power of Q-SYS status blocks. But most people use a couple of status blocks in their design. Some people are using all of the status blocks in their design, but what does the status block tell you? So every peripheral, every Q-SYS core, every inventory item stuff on the left-hand sidebar of Q-SYS Designer that you can bring in has status information that comes with it. So some of that status information lives inside of Q-SYS exclusively, and it's real-time information, things like core temperature, process temp, clocking information, IP address information, and some of that information gets automatically forwarded up to Q-SYS Reflect. Like at the top of the screen here, you've this core status, we've got just a green bar that says OK. That's actually a categorized, what we like to call a traffic light system that tells you just a heads up display of information about what's happening with the core, and all of that gets sent up to Reflect so that you can get that cloud enabled, one peak snapshot of what's happening with the core and some critical information about what's going on. We also get information about video status, PTP clocking. A lot of different stuff shows up in each of these status blocks. But I mentioned that information also gets automatically forwarded up to Reflect. So why is this block important? So the core status block, I mentioned some of that information lives exclusively in Q-SYS Designer, and that's because that information is real time and there's a lot of it. So some of that just doesn't make sense to send directly to Q-SYS Reflect because of the nature of it. And maybe it's a static piece of static information like IP address, where you can find that through Reflect's core manager access, or it's the fan speed for the core, and that's not really useful in Reflect unless you wanted to grab that, in which case you would connect to the core. And just to give an idea of how many people are using this, I went ahead and reached out to our data team. So in starting in Q-SYS Designer 10.0, we do a little bit of data gathering about how you're using your Q-SYS systems. Don't worry, it is an optional thing where you can check a box and it will turn that on or off. But we sampled 57,000 systems roughly, and we got a nice peek at how people are using the core status blocks as well as other status blocks. But I really liked this breakdown here. So 54% of designs that we sampled actually use the core status block. And specifically with what's called verbose mode disabled. We'll talk about verbose mode a little bit later. 54% of people just drag the status block in, which is great. We love to see that. 16% of you are turning on verbose mode, which gives you extra information about the core's processes and things that are happening. But 30% of those designs don't have the core status block in them, which means they likely don't have other status blocks in them as well, which means that you're losing out on access to some really important information that helps you diagnose what's happening in the system. Things like network video information, things like, QoS details, EDID information, camera information, the aux power status of a connected device. If it has a DC power input, you can actually see that power information coming in. There's so much stuff that lives in that. And some of these status blocks you get implicitly just by bringing that in, like the camera status block, for instance, has the control information built into it, but it's really important to keep an eye on what's in these blocks because they tell us a lot about how our system is running, and they can give us a sneak peek at issues we might run into before we realize they become issues. So this middle section here, I'm going to talk briefly about just some problem solving things that we can do with the status block and how we can use it to solve some problems. The really common ones that I kind of categorize as easy errors or easy things that you can go and figure out. Things like devices missing, not showing up in the design, or they're only partially connected to the design. Identifying easy network errors or seeing a network error before it becomes a bigger problem, and then figuring out some camera and video related errors, some really quick and easy stuff. So missing devices, when you see something on the network, and I'm actually going to jump into Q-SYS Designer now so we can kind of take a peek at some of these status blocks in a runtime environment. So in my lab here, I've got a Core Nano set up, and I've got a fair number of peripherals connected here. And we can see that, if I just scroll through, I've got a core status block. So I've just got the regular old standard status shown here on screen. And we can see, temps are fine. Chassis fan speed seems to be fine. We can also see our clock status. So I've got a somewhat complicated network here where this core is actually connected to another core that sits on my network. So it's actually a follower for my PTP network. But because it also lives on its own network on a VLAN, it is actually the PTP v2 grandmaster for that secondary network. It's a little bit complicated, but you can see that real-time status, and we even have a little indicator here that tells you what the clock leader is for that network. The grandmaster text indicator here tells you what device is actually the clock leader. So this is the MAC address of that device. So if I went and did a network scan and matched up that MAC address, or if I'm out on a job site commissioning and I look through all of my network devices, I find the MAC address that I notated off the box when I put it in the rack, and I find that one, I'll see, oh, that's the NV32 that I'm using to talk to you guys on right now. See things like link status, the network mode. So if you're set to static or automatic, like DHCP, you'll see that network configuration set up here. Link speed, which can be very important. There's actually a couple devices that if they are set at 100 megabit mode, or auto negotiation didn't work properly, you'll see that information show up here. There's also a USB reset that comes on all of the cores that have USB bridging. We'll talk about that a little later and what you can do with that. But for any peripheral, you also get some status as well. So touchscreen, you get temperature, memory usage, a lot of the same stuff as a core. For camera streams, you get a status for, am I actively streaming that camera? This LED actually matches up to another LED on the front of the camera that can be used as that appears to work like a tally light, and it just shows you whether that camera is currently streaming to the far end. There's MAC address, serial number, a lot of different information here about things like, where can you find the preview stream for the RTSP address for the preview stream. So if you have to punch into VLC and, hey, I'm not seeing that USB camera feed on my connected Teams device. Let's go in with VLC media player on the same network, and let's make sure that I'm actually seeing that image coming off of the USB video bridge. We can see whether we're losing any packets, what our current video format is. The device I'm connected to is actually a USB 2.0 only device. It's that little mini PC that's running. You can't see it very well because my background's blurred, but there's a piece display behind me playing camera video, and it's only playing at 360p because it's a small mini PC. But you can see a lot of this information and use this to diagnose the system. If I actually go and let's do this. So I've got a Netgear switch here that I can use for testing. So I'm just gonna bounce the touch panel port. So what that does is it will turn on and off the network port, and you can see now my TSC is offline momentarily because it's going to reboot. And we can actually watch this. So that TSC now shows a missing status because we've turned off the power to the PoE port. And so as that comes back through, it's actually going to come back online, and we can see a couple of those statuses. There's actually about 6 or 7 different status indicators that can show up on this heads up display. The 3 most common ones you'll see are the green OK status, this red missing status, and then you can see a gray one that will say not present or missing. So that indicates that Q-SYS Designer can't find that device in configurator. And we'll just double check that I didn't hit the wrong button. Yep, there it comes back up. So now we should see that in a moment actually reboot, but we'll come back to that. We won't wait too long. So this is the first place I usually check with missing devices on the network to see what's happening. So going back through, checking the status of that device. So blue means it's initializing. This blue status will show up if a device is either in the process of booting up or if it's undergoing a firmware update. And then when it finishes, it'll turn green. It's also always good to check Q-SYS configurator. I know that that's a pretty straightforward rudimentary step in troubleshooting, but it is helpful to go into configurator, and we can see that this device is online. We can see its current link speed is 100 megabits per second. So there was an auto negotiation problem there, and it is not actually running at full gigabit speed, which on a TSC can cause some issues because it's rendering that user interface direct from the core. So we need that full gigabit to make sure that we're getting that information in a timely manner. And we can see now that it's finished rebooting. Generally, I like to go through a 3-step process when I am diagnosing a missing device on the network. And these are, really common ones. A lot of the commissioning engineers will be familiar with these steps. Check the status of a device inside of your design, see if it's connected, see if it's telling you why it's not working properly. Going back into configurator, using that multicast discovery protocol, that QDP protocol, to see if Q-SYS Designer can see that from your device if you're on the same network. Is it named correctly? Making sure that that host name is set up so that it matches what's in your design file so that Q-SYS Designer can find it and link it to that file. And, obviously, is the IP set correctly? And then going back to the source, make sure it's powered. Is it connected? Are the power cables connected? Do you have link lights on the network connection? Just going through. I know that those are the basic steps, but The ABCs of IT is what I call them. Because we've all been there and had to go and unplug it, plug it back in, or sometimes that cable just miraculously found its way out of the wall if somebody's back there vacuuming. Um, so other kinds of network issues that you can come across, networking issues. Now, I did just demonstrate a link state issue with the touchscreen, and I've mentioned that we can check the PTP clock leader and the clock offset. Or actually, I didn't mention clock offset. So um, on the on the core status block, and I will flip back over to designer. We're going to flip back and forth between the presentation and our running file. So on the core status block, you will see this clock offset, and you can see right now it's at -1 microsecond. So that means that clock offset is how far away from our clocking signal we are time-wise. So as we move and vary, that's actually the jitter of our network at play right now. So like I said, I have a little bit of a hodgepodge network today. So that's kind of on purpose because I wanted to generate some of these issues. As this clock offset approaches, Cameron, what did we agree on? About 20 microseconds? Um,
Yeah, you start seeing it plus or minus 25 is kind of right around that threshold of where you can start seeing some problems.
yeah, so that as that clock offset, that jitter increases to plus or minus 20 microseconds, you'll start to throw errors. The first one you won't actually see, which will be the clocking follower device, so the core in this case, requesting a new clock leader election. So that best master clock algorithm, that PTP clocking election process will happen again because a device on the network is saying, hey, something's wrong. I can't keep up. I need some help. Can we find another leader for the network who is better equipped or better placed on the network to lead us all and keep us all synchronized? If that continually happens, individual devices will start throwing errors or they will fall off of your PTP clocking network entirely. At which point the core status will it'll start by throwing a compromised error and it'll say, missing clocking packets or PTP grandmaster mismatch, which will be a red error. That's actually a very common one you see. If you see PTP grandmaster mismatch, that is a pretty surefire sign that something is going on with the network. So that's, checking your PTP priority, checking QoS presets, and checking those critical network configurations on your switch. Now, I'm not going to go into critical networking parameters in this class, but we do have extensive documentation on our help site that talks about how IGMP query configuration, QoS settings for Q-SYS, as well as mixing those with Dante and AES67, setting up your switch for multicast routing and how to manage, if you have multiple VLANs and you need to connect Q-SYS devices across VLANs, how to handle that, or if your system can handle that. Basically, we give out all the information required to qualify a network and a network switch for operation with Q-SYS. So Ted, I did see this one in the Q&A. So Ted asked, I've never seen that block for Netgear switch before. Is that a plugin in Q-SYS Designer? Yes, it is. So this is the Netgear AV line switch plugin. I'll very, very briefly just show this. So this allows you to connect to a Netgear switch that your core is connected to. It does have to be, I believe, to get all the information correctly, it does have to be layer 3 connection because of we're doing some LLDP integration here to bring up like who the vendor is, what the MAC address for each device is, what the host name for that is, and then you can see a bunch of information here. I've got a bunch of errors on mine because I've been playing around with the switch and intentionally generating some errors to force things for the class. But you can see the PoE draw on every port. There's a lot of different information in here that you can see, and it also has a command line, so you can actually take control of that switch and issue CLI commands as if you were connected with a serial cable. It's a really interesting plugin that is very useful for stuff like this. So yeah, so that's the that Netgear plugin. It is an asset manager, as are so many other plugins that you can use to help with your designs. And all of those asset manager plugins have their own bespoke status that you can also leverage. So talked just a tiny bit about networking issues, and just a couple things to look out for with the network. What about video issues? So I mentioned, you can see the status of your camera stream. You can see the status of your video bridge. You can also see a few different things with USB and HDMI status. So let's take a look at some of those. Obvious important ones are, looking at your USB connections. So I mentioned the USB bridge shows a video format state. It also shows you the encoding and the USB speed. Are you losing any frames? Are there any packets lost? This indicator here on the top right actually tells you whether the driver for the connected device, so in this case, the Zoom PC that my USB is connected to, whether that's actually pulling camera feed from my NV21 that I'm connected to. So I could actually, if I close the camera app that's open there, this would actually turn off. In a Teams environment, if you hit that camera button on the Teams touch panel, this will actually turn off because Teams only wakes up the camera driver when it intends to show it to the far end. So this is a really useful place to debug some UC unified communications and collaboration platform issues you might be running into. Also, because we have an NV system in here, we can see a lot of information just from the HDMI source and display blocks. So we have, in this design, I have an NV1 and I have an NV21. So I'm just doing a point-to-point NV system to take the little mini PC I have in this system and connect it up to a little an old point of sale monitor that I just have here in my office, a little Acer monitor. So we can see on my display, I can actually see the model of that Acer monitor. If that manufacturer has embedded this information in the EDID, we can actually see that information, see how many audio channels are there. I can also save that EDID to the core, and I can actually bring that over and expose that to the source device to make sure that I'm capturing that EDID and representing it to the source exactly how I want that source to work. This is really useful in solving some device specific issues that you can run into with things like HDCP and resolutions, because we do have some default EDID files in here. We call them .q EDID files because Q-SYS. And we like to put the letter Q on as many things as possible.
We're glad you're all here drinking the Kool-Aid anyways. So,
Yes.
So I've got a question in here back on the Netgear switch. I wasn't 100% sure. The question is that plugin only available or operational with the AV lines, the Netgear AV line? I don't know that it's been tested outside of that. Do you have any insight on that?
That specific plugin is Netgear AV line only. So there is, if you find it in Asset Manager, it does have a list of compatible models. I believe most of the 4250 AV line series works. I'm sure one of my colleagues who is in the chat will be pinging me or Dan momentarily with the exact
Yeah,
list.
it's like the
Um,
NS10s, the M4350s. But yeah, if you go there to Asset Manager, it'll list all of the ones that we know it's compatible. And if you find out that some of the other non-AV line switches
yeah.
feed some information back, we'd like to drop it on
I'm
communities.
looking forward to a soon future Q-SYS update where you'll be able to go to qsyslibrary.com
Yes, there we go.
and find this information online without having to open Q-SYS Designer.
Cool.
So big shout out to that team. They're doing very good work. But continuing back through here, so we can also see things like the active cable detection and valid format state. So if you're working with an HDMI cable and you have I've seen it once before of a cable passing video, but a cable passing cable detection, but not valid format. I see it all the time. Um, checking your EDID. If you're not getting that cable detect, that means that 5 volt is not passing across your cable. So that's just a circuit closed indicator that shows that we're getting the 5 volt signal from the HDMI feed. If that doesn't show up, you want to check the integrity of the cable, maybe swap out for a known working cable and then validate and then come back and revisit. We can also see HDCP encryption status. So if you know you're working with an HDCP source, maybe you're showing a movie. Apple devices are notorious for turning on HDCP all the time, even if they don't necessarily need it at that moment. So you can see that status and you can modify that status. You can modify the HDCP mode. And then you can verify that on the downstream device as well. So that if you have a very specific video transmit and receive scenario, you can handle that here. Let's see what other status. So with speaking of the USB video bridge, I mentioned that USB reset that was in the core status block. So what this USB reset does is if you are having issues with USB bridging or with HID, you can hit this button and it will close all of those connections, all of those USB driver connections, and it will reset the voltage connection on the USB line. So the 5 volt connection, it will drop that and simulate a hot plug event. So it will reinitialize. This will force the endpoint device to reinitialize all of its USB connections. So if you're having issues there, you can hit this and reset those. Very handy for, some computers do not like USB-C connections, as it's still, it seems like it's taking a little bit for that standard to really standardize. Everywhere on. So let's go ahead and keep moving. So whoop, not that fast. So we've talked about some basic issues. So let's talk about what happens when this isn't enough information to figure out what's going on with the system. So we have to help with that. We have something called core verbose status.
My wife wishes I had a verbose mode button she could turn off, but that's just me.
So inside of the core status block only, we have a property called verbose mode. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to give you additional information from the core about things like operating system processes, memory usage, just a bunch of different information about how the core is running and what it's currently doing. So to show you where this is, I'm going to pop offline for a moment and inside of our Q-SYS designer file, I've got my status block. And over here on the right, I've got my core properties. And if I look down just above USB bridging, there is a property called verbose. And I go ahead and tick that to yes. And then we'll go ahead and quickly recompile the world's fastest Q-SYS designer compile. And just like that, we are back in our online mode, and I'll go ahead and scroll back to our status. And just like that, now we have even more core status information. So we still have the same that same network information that we get. We still get our process temps, our chassis fan, and our heads up display status. But now we've got some memory usage and some percentage usage that we can take a look at. We also have this system info field where if I was running into any issues, they would populate here. We also have some DSP core statistics. So Cameron, why don't you tell me a little bit about some of the information that's in here? Specifically, let's talk about the overruns and this periods that I'm seeing.
Yeah, I mean the most important part, I mean the core, we allocate our CPU cores to run different aspects of the core. So core 0, what we call, is typically our OS and application control. And so if you are experiencing errors or, I mean, if you've seen logs like errors as frame overruns or processing overruns, those are always associated with that overrun value in these DSP statistics, which is nice to be able to see when trying to understand what was happening on the core. So essentially, the overrun is we are processing data from the operating system with interrupts. We need to process a certain amount of information within that interrupt. And when that doesn't get completed in that time frame, then an overrun occurs.
Yeah. So, and with these two DSP cores, because we separate the audio engine, and the control engine and the video engine, these different engines are running in different places. This actually means that these overruns don't necessarily come with visible performance loss. Me and Cameron were talking offline about this, and there's two different kinds of overruns. There's an overrun called a frame overrun, which refers to the Q-SYS control frame. So what the Q-SYS control frame is, just very brief overview, is a buffer between the control engine, which is sending data and is the mastermind of everything that's happening in Q-SYS. That's what you interact with, to tell, say, a gain block to move up and down. The control frame acts as a buffer between that control engine and the audio engine itself, because the audio engine is running as fast as possible to make sure that all of the DSP events happen in real time and they happen on time. So we just make sure that we're not overloading the DSP engine with control data. So every 33 milliseconds, we allow that data to go through the control frame back and forth between the audio and the control engine. If you want to know more about how the control frame works, Jeff Perkins has a wonderful control quick start that you can find on YouTube, all about the control frame. He also has a wonderful library of control quick starts that talk about various things like programming, lots of different stuff about how Lua works. Highly recommend you check that out. The other type of overrun is called a processing overrun. And that is when the DSP engine itself fails to complete that interrupt that Cameron referred to. And so when that happens, that overrun will report itself as a status to the core. You may not hear it just because of how fast those happen, and we have a certain amount of expected error handling that we plug into that to make sure that even if you do have one or two processing or frame overruns, they don't impact the overall operation of the system. But you can see all of those statistics here in the DSP stats. We also have a lot of different process usage and memory usage details that show up here, that allow you to see what's happening in real time on the core. So let's just quickly back up into our presentation and let's talk about those. So the first one is our memory usage. So memory usage refers to our actual core's random access memory. So how much RAM. Same as if you were, opened up your PC at home. If we don't open Chrome browsers in Q-SYS, but if you open up a ton of Chrome browsers, you're gonna use up a lot of that RAM, and you're gonna see your computer slow down as it tries to keep up with that memory loading. Well, we can see that memory usage inside of Q-SYS Designer as to how hard the core is working, and understanding how its real-time load is. So this is very helpful when pairing it up with our check design tool, because the check design tool works as estimating. So what it does is it compiles the design file and it makes some assumptions about how hard the core is going to have to work to run that file. And we have categories for, category 1 DSP processing, category 2, what your network bandwidth is. But those are all estimates because check design has to make some assumptions because we aren't running the file for a certain amount of time to measure things and see what it's actually doing. Memory usage is great for understanding how the impact of your design file on your actual core in real time. During the commissioning process, maybe you boot to the core, you let it run for a while, and you can see what that memory usage is. We have a couple other compute usage, which behaves similarly in that they show a percentage of available resources from 0 to 100. The first one is the control compute process. So this is those OS level processes that Cameron referred to, the Linux kernel. It also measures the UCI rendering because we render those UCI files. We render those on the core and then deliver them to the touch panel to be operated on and used and delivered to the user. We also put a little bit of DSP processing happens in there in the control engine. It's stuff that's nonlinear, that doesn't require the reserved DSP process to make sure it runs as fast as possible or in real time. Things like static processes like voicings tend to happen here. And then, I have included a link to, some more information about the frame overrun and the processing overrun between here and the process compute. So the second one is our process compute usage. So that's the category 1 and 2 DSP processing. So that's your linear processes and things like parametric EQs, AEC blocks, notch feedback controllers all show up here. This also measures how hard your AEC is actually working in real time. Because that can vary based on the amount of residual echo suppression that is in your design or how hard the nonlinear processing engine is working to cancel out those echoes. And then the final one here, which is our Lua compute processing. So this one is a little tricky because this monitors exclusively Lua script resources only. So this is things like text controller, block controller, and the plugins. And it's specifically reserved functions that only get used by the Lua scripts. Most of the time, this should stay below 1 or 2%. In fact, in the design file that, and to answer your question, Jermail, the example template that I included will go out with the PDF and the design resources because I think it's helpful to have. I may take out the some of the stuff I'm about to talk about, but I did actually build in some data here in the design file to try and approximate some bad scripting habits, some things that would generate some higher memory usage. So we're back here in my core verbose status, and you can see that I'm using 27% of my core's memory. So that's pretty standard. My control compute usage is bouncing a little bit. This will be higher when you have Q-SYS Designer open, because you're actually creating an additional link to the core to deliver all of that technical information about the system back to you. Process compute is pretty low because I'm running almost no audio through this. I actually have one HDMI feed because I'm playing some audio in the background. And then my Lua compute usage is hovering around 0.1 to 0.5%. So I built some really, ignore the titles of these because they're not actual memory leaks. They're just things that I know will continually generate a lot of data. So if I turn all of these scripts on, you can see we'll actually go here to inspector, where you can see this information, and you can see how much memory each of these blocks is generating. So a couple of these are generating a couple hundred kilobytes, which is fairly normal for a script, but 2.1 megabytes is abnormal. So that's a lot of data to be generated for a single text controller block. And if we left this running uncontained, it might eventually cause that script to crash because it's using too many resources, or it's reached the arbitrary execution limits that we hold the Lua engine to make sure it can't crash the other two engines. So if I go back over here, so now my Lua compute usage is at 1.5%. So I turned on all 5 of those bad scripts, and I barely made a dent in my Lua compute usage. So this just outlines that this is useful for this Lua compute can be useful for understanding some data in real time, but it's not going to be the magic wand that you can wave over your design file to identify something. And it can be tricky to pinpoint things like memory leaks or other different types of errors in the system. But this will help tell you what's happening with your core, and maybe helps point you in the right direction for understanding what's going wrong.
Can I interrupt with a few
Yeah.
questions just to get caught up on that? Also, before I get to the questions, I'm going to personally ask on that Lua compute usage, would you ever expect to see that at 20, 30, 40%, or what? I mean,
So me and Cameron talked a little bit about this offline, and the short answer, in my experience, and playing around with this while building this class, I could never get it to climb above 2.5%. So 20%, I would expect to see another error of some kind. But also that depends on what that Lua script is doing. Like a lot of those scripts that I wrote are doing some file operations, and they're opening files and not closing them properly. So that's going to generate some other error. That's going to generate some other adverse side effects if I let those run. And those would actually probably cause the control compute engine to crash before the Lua compute engine actually failed, because Lua's designed to be lightweight. So the short answer is probably not. But if you saw it above, I would start looking at my Lua compute and my Lua scripts that are running on the core. If I saw that reliably hovering over 5 to 10%,
well, and I
checking.
think another way is you could, man, is this script maybe a problem? And you pull that script out, and you at least use that number as a baseline, and then
Yeah, and
maybe
that's exactly what you want to do, is use that, use this in conjunction with, an elimination method, where if you have a problematic plugin in your design, turn that plugin off, and then turn a plugin off and monitor what that compute usage changes, and see how that impacts the file.
I mean, it's like muting inputs chasing echo. Right. So,
Exactly. Yeah.
so
And
from anonymous attendee, and this person attends a lot of these. So good to see you again, anonymous. What is the expected behavior if, and this one goes back several minutes here, if a Zoom or Teams call is on when performing a USB reset?
that is a great question. So the answer is it depends on if it's a Zoom or a Teams call, because the two systems actually handle USB disconnects and reconnects differently. So Zoom will try and will remember your device preferences when you make those selections in the preference panel. And what will happen is usually it will try and recover and restore those USB connections. So your audio devices and your video devices. So it'll try and reconnect those peripherals back to the Zoom core. Um, it will drop out your video. So your video in both systems will always drop out and you have to restart it. Teams does remember fairly well what you had selected before a USB reset or a USB failure event. And when you plug it back in, it will bring the audio and the speaker connections back up. It will not bring the video back up automatically. You'll have to go back up to the touch panel and you'll have to hit the camera icon on the Teams control panel to bring the video back to the user. That's a great question, and it comes up a lot when commissioning systems with Teams and Q-SYS, and maybe we unplug the USB connection for a moment, or we change USB peripherals, and you have to go back to the Teams panel to reconnect those. Ravender asked, do we have these data attributes available via SNMP? So some of that data is available via SNMP trap. I don't believe all of it is. The verbose statistics I do not believe show up in the SNMP. Cameron, do you know that off the top of your head?
I don't know what subset of them show up. I have to check.
And then actually that's a perfect segue for the next slide, because we can actually do this in real time. So what happens when you don't know the answer to a question? Or you have some information that you got from a Q-SYS status block and you need to know, what can I do with that? So there's three different places you can go. And I put these in order of kind of how I would go and visit them. Although communities I might put at the end, or I might put it at the beginning, depending on what kind of question I'm asking. So the first one is our Q-SYS help documentation. So qsyshelp.qsc.com with the hyphen in there. And that will take you to that's our entire developer and integrator documentation. It's publicly accessible. That's the most up-to-date source of truth on what every block in Q-SYS does, and how all of it works. So that's going to be the place. Like, if I needed to answer the question, I want to answer the question about the SNMP, that would be where I go to find that. Q-SYS Communities is great for asking questions of your fellow developers. So if I'm working with a plugin and I am seeing high Lua compute usage, and I want to, say, hey, is somebody else using the Netgear plugin and seeing high values as well? Can you confirm? And somebody else, in the community who's also running that plugin, I don't believe the Netgear plugin has a high load. In fact, I can show it right now, running connected to a 26 port switch. It's fairly normal. It also shows that it's a trusted plugin, because it went through our Q-SYS developer network and our internal Q-SYS plugin team for verification. if those two methods don't yield the result you are looking for, or you haven't been able to get the information you need, support.qsys.com is home to two different pieces of useful information, or useful pieces that we want to make sure we're looking at. The first is our Q-SYS knowledge base, and that's where we can, that's vetted answers that we develop internally. So things like known issue lists, popular articles, things like how to enable third-party controls in Zoom rooms. And I'm actually going to switch over to my Chrome tab now. So, avoiding errors when receiving AES67 streams, how to create a case. The other thing that's here that is important is up in the top right, there's a contact support button. And if you click that, you will be able to create a case, which means that you can create a case without having to, pick up the phone. You can put all of that information in an email. You can make very detailed notes about what you saw and what help you need, what product you were working with, serial numbers, your callback phone number. You could put in a whole bunch of information and be as detailed as you need to be to help us help you. And then our level 2 and level 3 support teams can look at that information, and we can ask for more if we need more information, maybe a Q-SYS log file or the design file itself, and we can help you debug that.
I would say on that, I mean, I'll be honest, I self-identify as analog Dan. Like, I take notes on paper and type them into things and all of that. And I used to be, and I get that there's people that are like, I'm going to be on this phone because someone's going to help me. By gosh, I got to get out of here today. And know that you go into the queue just like someone calling in on the queue. The benefit of the create a case is that you've got a bevy, we've got a gamut of people that are looking at these cases that come in, and if it's got oh wait, this is a audio processing, whatever, you may be more likely to get someone that has a stronger feel in that, be able to pull it rather than someone just answering calls off the queue. So giving more information, being proactive like that, we have really good success rate. Ask you to at least try it. Obviously, if the system's on fire and the biggest meeting ever is going to happen in 15 minutes with the CEO of the biggest company ever and your biggest customer, give us a call, right? I mean, we get that. But when there's opportunities, try that and see how the response time works and everything like that. Because we really pride ourselves on having good connections with our support teams. So. All right.
All right. And I did type an answer back, but according to our documentation, it appears that only the standard status information shows up in our SNMP inventory table. Or each SNMP entry only returns the standard status information, so it wouldn't return verbose mode. Although if verbose is enabled, it may return additional information inside the status string. I would have to test that just to be sure. But that's this is Q-SYS help. At the homepage, it also tells you information about the latest version of Q-SYS Designer that was released, as well as there's a whole slew of information for things like networking support and documentation for things. But that is all of the content I have. So I wanted to make sure we left a little bit of time for Q&A. I don't think we're leaving quite as much as I wanted, but thank you guys very much for coming. The first two questions that I know these ones have been open for a few minutes. Jermail asked, will this example template be provided to us for reference? Yes. That file will, I'm going to package up the assets for this and send them to Dan and our marketing team and make sure that those are made available somehow so that you can look at that. It's a very basic Q-SYS designer file, but it does have all the status blocks pulled out for all of the devices that are in that design. And then do we have any documentation out there for good threshold numbers for the compute usage for the process compute usage parameters? No, is the short answer. Generally speaking, there's you're going to want to develop, you're going to want to look at what the compute numbers are when you first push the file and see it run for a few minutes. And then and then just monitoring that over time if you suspect you have an issue. Um, the the purpose of those is to be able to see longer term issues as they start to build up. And I'm looking at Cameron just to get a mental confirmation on this, is just
You're right.
watch
I
those
mean,
numbers.
you typically wouldn't, I mean, for memory, when you start up your design, let the system kind of boot up and settle down, that should really never change that much. If that's increased over time, that's typically that's, I'll say, bad. I mean, those should be stable for control compute usage. That's going to vary quite a bit. Like Thomas said, we don't have a documented threshold, but as you approach that 100%, you can experience lag in, let's say metering or values updating, nothing very severe. But as that approaches, and you don't ever want it constantly getting up towards that 100%. That's when you can actually see issues, because if you think of all that the control aspect of our core is doing, not only just general updating monitors, UCIs, and that data, it's also establishing and monitoring all the TCP connections to all the devices out there, handling QDP and discovery. And so it's something that also you wouldn't see continuously rise over time. I think that's what's like, you want to look at those in that aspect, is they should be fairly stable. If you have a lot of scripts or you're running the room compared to the room setting idle, you're going to see those differences. But it's more of just keeping you aware of the over time, as Thomas had said. You don't want to see those trending upwards.
Yeah. So yeah, it just monitoring again, just monitoring those over time, especially if you suspect there's something wrong with the system, then there is actually an averaging time adjustment knob that is below these that allows you to actually, by default it's set to 2 seconds, so it samples the control process compute usage, or all of these compute parameters. It samples them every 2 seconds. If you increase that time, it will slow down how often it's changing, and you can use that to monitor the system and see a slower average time. So if that's creeping up over, say every 30-second sample, if you see it creeping up, or if you see it consistently at a very high value, then that may be indicative of either, like Cameron said, you may just have a very dense file. That is also possible. We can run. These are all designed to be able to go close to 100%. They're resources. We want to give you all of the resource, and if there's a percent value, we want to give that percent value the ability to run all the way to 100%, because that's 100% of your available resources. There was another question I saw that looks like it may have just been answered, is does the block controller show up in the Lua compute usage? The answer is yes. The only one that I wasn't sure about if it shows up in Lua compute or if it would stay in control compute is, as far as scripting blocks go, is the command block, because that is a control function block. A lot of Q-SYS designers blocks, some of them are built in Lua, some of them are built in C#, the backend the software that kind of runs Q-SYS Designer. The ones that are built inside of Lua, some of their Lua evaluation will show up in the Lua compute. But generally speaking, the ones that will show up in Lua compute are block controller, text controller, and the lesser used control script, or the script controller, the old legacy control script.
We make custom components and tie them in. And
Custom
Yeah.
components.
well, no, I
It's-
meant that's what
yeah,
the other block is for. You tie your controls in there.
But yeah, that's a little bit more information about the compute process. Couple more questions. By default, it seems the Netgear 4250 switches are not visible on the network, nor can they be found with Netgear Discovery Tool. What is the best way to find and connect them to that plugin? So most of the 4250 switches do come with a static control IP out of the box. We're entirely running on my experience off the top of my head right now. The AV line switches, I know that the control network opens up for the if the out of band port stays open for the first 5 minutes, I believe that the switch is powered on, and you can plug in and just access it, access its CLI. The answer for me is usually doing either doing like an ARP scan with my laptop, doing an IP scan because while directly connected to the switch, because it'll show up in a discovery scan on whatever port it's connected to your laptop on. Generally, that's the best way. The plugin does have some documentation about how to get started with connecting up a switch. So unfortunately, I'm not very familiar with the Netgear Discovery tool, so I can't speak to that. But if you're having issues, I would recommend contacting Netgear support. They're super great and very helpful. If you're using an NS switch, then you would contact our support, and we would help you get the information you need. The last question I have so far
Yeah.
is, speaking of software updates, I get this question asked many times and would like to get the latest opinion from QSC. When new software is out, do you recommend running the latest software, or what is the recommendation? So, Dan, I was telling you, I was
I was gonna say
expecting.
I have an opinion, you have an opinion, but I'm gonna
So,
say Cameron's the most adjacent to development. So what would his opinion be?
I'm gonna give my comment on it, and then I'll let Cameron add his commentary as well. The answer is it depends. So I learned I caught that phrase from an old audio instructor of mine. Is every question I asked a question, it seemed like a really straightforward answer, and he'd always give me back, it depends, and then it would explain both sides of it. Well, it depends on what the goal of that specific system is. What are the project requirements? What's during your needs gathering requirements, you're outlining a couple of critical things. Obviously, we never want to deliver a system that could that has bugs, or could fail in a specific way. We never want to deliver that to a customer. And we work really hard, and we all stress internally about any bugs that get found in a new version of Q-SYS Designer. And so we generally want to yes. Okay, I can't believe somebody knows Pat Brown,
Oh
name
man, how
drop
do you
Pat
know?
Brown. So yeah, we never want to deliver a bug intentionally, but some systems are more sensitive to downtime and outage than other systems. I would just I would start by identifying, are there new devices in my system? Are there new products that we just released, that require the latest version of Q-SYS Designer? Are there, taking a look at the, what's new in Q-SYS 10.0 on the homepage for our help documentation will tell you the recent resolved issues. If you see something in there that is like, man, I know, that's gonna be, there's one in 10.01 related to Dante Virtual Sound Card. So if I'm working with Dante Virtual Sound Card on my system, I know, okay, I need to have at least 10.01. If I'm using a lot of older legacy devices and I want to just have the most stable version that runs all of those devices, or I've got a customer who says zero downtime is a priority for us, I may design the system or turn to our long-term stable branch. If I don't need the brand new hot off the press features, then I may look to LTS. Generally speaking, though, when I'm developing systems, I develop under the assumption I'm either using LTS or I'm using the latest version of Q-SYS Designer, because that's going to have the most bug fixes in it. It's going to have the most the highest level of hardware compatibility that we can offer. That's my opinion on it. Is if I need it to be legacy and stable, I use LTS. Otherwise, I use right now 10.02. Cameron, your thoughts?
That was exactly what I was going to say.
Yes.
No, I mean, you hit the points. If you really need the new features, the new hardware, then yes, going with the latest builds. And I work a lot on the development team on pushing back issues and things that we've found into the LTSs. I love the LTSs. They're a great option for someone that wants to stay in that versioning that's always going to get nothing but bug updates. Those two are the most important builds, what Thomas talked on, the LTS and then the new releases. You may not have any problems on an older version or something that's end of life. I think I just want to put out there is your system may have not had problems. And if you do, and you have some sort of issue in a non-new release and an LTS, like for the support side of things, it's really difficult for us to come up with solutions or help you because typically anything you've experienced in older software can't be fixed in that older software as well. So for like a support side, we're constantly making fixes and improvements in the LTS and the new releases. So that's another good reason to go up to either of those two.
Cool. Yeah, it's a tricky question. I mean, in a way, I mean, we personally, I wait a day or two before any like demo systems I have running at home that, might be mission critical, meaning AKA my wife can't watch Real Housewives of something, but then, that's kind of, it's just good, normal practices. Like in our experience centers, we wait until we shut the center down, we do a maintenance, and we upload everything at that time so we can go through and test it and make sure the interoperability. So, but yeah, some good guardrails there. Will you be at any upcoming conferences?
So I typically, aside from the obvious one, which is, come find me and Dan at Infocom, I typically stay inside of the Northeast region. So I travel around the territory that, it covers Virginia up to the border with Canada and then west to Detroit. So Northeast is quote unquote Northeast. So I have a fairly big territory. I show up to some regional events. I show up to a lot of integrator specific events. So I may be coming to an office near you soon. Dan oversees a lot of our strategic training initiatives. So if you visit an experience center like the Austin Experience Center that he is advertising behind him so wonderfully, You'll see Dan there quite frequently. Cameron, I don't know how often you travel. We try and let Cameron out as much as he wants to come out.
I'm usually stuck behind the curtains, so it takes some effort. I typically don't get out much, but trying to make it into some more events coming up this next coming up year.
Well, a lot of voice of the customer and some of that. Do you do some of the voice of the customer stuff they do, or kind of more drilling down with, I think, probably identified people or users or things like that to gain
Yeah, I mean,
insight?
definitely looking as we grow. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm focused in on what our customers need. How
right.
can we fix our software
You're
and
not going to
improve
go
it?
work a tabletop show
No, yeah.
talking about the latest product, right? So,
Yeah.
but you may be a part of a think tank or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you, everybody. We really appreciate it. And the questions are what make it, and we appreciate that. But, there was a lot going on in this one, so we ran a little bit long. But hey, wasn't due to technical difficulties or anything like that. So I think we're good. We really appreciate it. Next month, in this month alone, just for those that are still hanging on, we've got planning clocking domains. It is going to be on the 11th, on the 25th. We'll be doing our designing with NV endpoint. So we're always updating that designing with NV endpoint. So if you get something, if you haven't seen that in 6 months or so, you'll see some of the NV, WE, the wall encoder, things like that, how to use that. And then what you'll see in December, we're getting that list put together. So we're going to have a deep dive on all of our new processors and kind of where they fit in and how you design for them. Use them. Also, if you're familiar with Kevin Rodas, who's on our strategic accounts team, he builds a little 10-acre Christmas light show every year, and he monitors and controls that with Q-SYS. So if you want to see how you use Q-SYS to monitor a 10-acre Christmas light show, join us for that as well. So that'll be the Tuesday or Wednesday before the Christmas holiday there, I think, on that one. So keep your eyes peeled for that as well. I will tell you that the funniest part of Kevin's Christmas light show is he starts in August by building a 10-acre wireless network, and all of the nodes are inside of not Jimmy John's, Jason's Deli pickle buckets, because they give them away free. So there you go. Anyways, that's all we've got this week, and we really appreciate everybody taking the time out, and have a great day. Thank you much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye all.